Welcome back to Economic Outlook. Today I'm going to begin a series on energy consumption in the developing world. My goal is to look at how the developing world uses energy today and how these consumption patterns may change in the future as developing markets become more advanced. Although experts disagree on the future of oil production, there's considerably more consensus about future demand. Most experts agree that global oil demand will increase alongside economic expansion. There's a strong historical relationship between global GDP growth and petroleum consumption. Experts also agree that the developing world is the most likely source of future economic growth. More advanced economies will continue to expand, but developing markets will emerge with a faster rate of growth and provide a larger return for investors, albeit with greater risk. Economic expansion in the developing world will translate into greater demand for oil in developing nations. The growing demand for oil is also correlated to a more general increase in demand for overall energy resources. One of the hallmarks of modernization is an increase in per capita energy consumption in both the consumer, industrial, and residential sectors. As consumers have more discretionary income, their demand for better housing, transportation, electronics, and other goods are increased. This increases a nation's aggregate overall demand for energy and raises an important question. How will the economic expansion of developing countries like China shift these countries' demands for energy resources? To understand the path developing nations may take, it's important to understand how global energy consumption is distributed. One of the best sources on global energy distribution can be found in the Peterson Institute's book, China's Rise: Challenges and Opportunities. China's Rise provides information on total energy consumption, not just oil, for sets of developing countries and more advanced economies in 2005. To illustrate how each country utilized energy, consumption is divided among 6 sectors: agriculture, industry, commercial, residential, transportation, and other. This breakdown is important because countries consume energy in different ways as their economies develop. The relative allocation of energy resources shifts as countries become wealthier. An examination of global consumption by sector is a useful reference point to understand these shifts. Global energy consumption acts as a weighted average for all of the world's countries' activities. It reflects the aggregate use of energy across the world's spectrum of economic development. A plurality of the world's energy in 2005 went toward industry. The second highest use was in transportation, followed by residential and commercial. Agriculture and other uses each consumed only 2% of the world's energy. The industrial, commercial, and transportation sectors are critical to economic growth. Not surprisingly, they comprised over 85% of global energy consumption in 2005. However, this distribution does not necessarily reflect the usage patterns of any particular country. Some areas may have higher concentrations of industrial energy use, whereas others may have more energy spent on transportation. These distinctions reveal important characteristics of developing markets emerging into more advanced economies. The goal for most developing economies is to emerge as a modern state. Although many countries may eschew a traditional capitalist orthodoxy, most leaders, influential business people, and industrialists want to grow the overall wealth of their nations. Today's most advanced economies are generally consumer-driven. Whether emerging markets like China will follow this trend remains to be seen. However, it's useful to look at usage patterns in more developed economies like the United States to see where emerging markets may be headed in the future. To see how developing countries may consume energy in the future, it's useful to look at examples like the United States or the European Union. The United States is the world's largest individual consumer of energy. In 2005, the U.S. devoted 2/5 of its total energy consumption to transportation. This was followed by industrial production at roughly 1/4 of total consumption, and commercial and residential usage equal to 30% of the total. Interestingly, the U.S. spent only 1% of its total energy consumption on agriculture despite the country's status as one of the world's largest producers of a number of staples. The European Union, which consists of 27 member states, demonstrated similar consumption habits to the United States in 2005. The EU used most energy for industrial production, followed by transportation at 30%, commercial at 22%, and residential usage at 11%. Again, agriculture took only a small proportion of the EU's total energy use. Although the United States and the European Union display similar consumption patterns, there are also important differences. These differences show that there is not one particular pattern that developing nations are preordained to follow. Deviations in consumption habits in the US and the European Union show how social choices and infrastructure differences can lead countries down different paths of energy usage. The most important difference in European and American consumption is in transportation. The United States devoted 10% more of its total energy resources to transportation than the European Union. There are many reasons for this difference. The US and the European Union have very different infrastructures. The European Union is spread over a smaller geographic area than the United States and has a vastly superior public transportation system. The United States covers more land area than the EU, making it more costly in energy terms to transport people and goods across the country. Additionally, an abundance of land allowed cities in the US to grow outward. Suburbs and commuting became the archetype for American living after World War II. In contrast, Europe's infrastructure is limited by geography. Rather than expand outward, cities have grown upward. Since most major European metropolitan areas existed before the car, automobile transportation is not as practicable as in the United States, whose cities developed around the commuter lifestyle. The United States' skewed uses of energy for transportation affects its distribution in other areas. Proportionally, Europe uses more energy for industrial and commercial purposes than the United States. There's less difference on a per capita basis, though. The relative difference stresses the United States' overwhelming consumption for transportation. These differences are important because they reflect ways in which other countries may choose to spend their energy resources. Sectors rely upon different types of energy reserves. Therefore, countries which develop more like the United States or the European Union may increase the demand for a certain kind of energy over others. For example, both the United States and the European Union are leaders in petroleum consumption. However, the United States uses far more oil on a per capita basis than the European Union because of its transportation infrastructure. If a country like China follows the development pattern of the United States, with its heavy emphasis on automobiles and little public transportation, it will become similarly dependent on oil. Now that we've seen consumption habits in the United States and the European Union, it's time to compare them to trends in emerging markets like China, Russia, and India. In my next entry, we'll look at these emerging markets. As always, thank you for joining me here at Economic Outlook, and be sure to check out my website at www.econoutlook.com. Thanks as always.